Hi there, so this is an update video on the position in the game of Korean War. Now I have to send out an apology to people that are looking forward to full coverage of the war because I'm actually about to start turn 7, so I just finished turn 6 and the last I videoed was at turn 3. What happened is essentially turn 4 went quite quickly and I thought I'd quickly do turn 5. And then this morning I had some time before the rest of my family woke up. I did turn 6, and it's a bit like that with my recording. Sometimes when I can take a turn, it's not a good time to be recording. Like disturbing people who are sleeping and so forth like that. My apologies. Turns 4, 5 and 6 have happened, and this is where we are at the end of turn 6. The city of Seoul is here. You can see it at the top of the screen. Chinese communist reinforcements having come in. Down here we have the city of Daejeon, and so in between we have North Korean defense line, such as it is, and then this is actually United Nations regiment and some assets. So the United Nations are all the way up here. Over on the east coast, they're about parallel. The US have actually put a depot here, and they've got two depots here. The North Koreans don't have depots now because at the moment we're in we have 3 turns essentially. The turn in which the Communist Chinese intervene, and then 2 more turns in which the North Koreans don't have to worry about depots. They don't have to worry about commitment level for their combat value. It's all just basic. And they get initiative. For 3 turns that's going on. Essentially, so what did happen? Well, it was interesting, in fact, because on turn 4, the Koreans, I believe it was turn 4, yes, right at the end of the second action phase of turn 4, the North Koreans actually took Musan. Now that would have meant that would have been the 6th of their 5 victory cities. If they take all 6, they have an automatic victory, but they have to hold at the end of the action phase. Now the trouble was that essentially their line stretched from essentially it was around. They held this port here. They held that amphibious invasion zone here. You can see they're still holding those. But then the United Nations held sort of around here, so they had a perimeter roughly along the riverline there, although some North Koreans were over. Then the North Koreans held the road all the way down to here, but the Americans held the road on this stretch. So the North Korean unit managed to zip through, but it could not hold it to the end of the action cycle. It was out of the supply line, and so on half defense, and Americans moving up from Busan, and also an invasion they brought in from Samjeonpo here, caught that unit in a pincer movement and surrounded and destroyed it. But it was worth it. It was a division and an armoured assets. But it was worth it for that chance of absolute victory. And if you sort of did an analysis beforehand of the game and the war, it would really tell you that is the last chance around turn 4, maybe 5, of the North Koreans getting their automatic victory. So if they do get it, it will happen within the first half of the game. Because after that, the Americans are just too heavily reinforced, really, for the North Koreans to have a chance. Unless that is that they had been able to move, have a sort of, have a line of operations stretch, a front line stretching all the way along here. The trouble was that they managed to punch through here because the Americans were fairly weak here, and that was because they had been concentrated forces here, so they were continually threatening the supply lines of the North Koreans. The North Koreans did put a supply line in Kumjon at one point. They did take Daegu, but it was briefly, but it was taken back soon after that. Musan was taken back, so they didn't get a supply line as far as down there. They had one here, and I think they only got one supply point. It might even have been 0. They didn't really manage to get the fully supplied for the units down here, and that was partly because the Americans were pushing up here. It meant that there was a lot, they had to reserve a lot of forces for defending that. Henceforth, North Koreans couldn't bring forward enough force to bear here to support that final push onto there. So it was a bit risky of the Americans to kind of denude this of forces and keep heavy forces here. I mean, I think they probably had roughly on balance half their forces here and half their forces here. So it was perhaps a risky manoeuvre, but it did pay off in the end. If they had been more conservative and just protected themselves in the Pusan perimeter, the North Koreans may not have got through because it would have been heavily defended around here. But then on the other hand, the North Koreans would have had these units all freed up, and they could have perhaps performed a pincer movement, a two-pronged attack on that here. So the Americans essentially kept all this terrain, except for that port city briefly, out of their control. Never went to the North Koreans at all. So that was turn 4. So turn 5, the North Koreans essentially got knocked back, and they were holding this line here because they were just trying to delay the Americans as much as possible. And the Americans were organising their interdiction here and here to slow down reinforcements, to slow any units from here moving up to reinforce into here. Now at this point I must clarify about the UN intervention. So what I didn't understand, because I didn't read the rules and the charts and tables close enough, is that there's a separate escalation chart. So what you do is you, as the UN player, you set your initial intervention here. So say if you set it at 1, then you only get reinforcement A. Then later on you could escalate, and say the next one you could escalate to 2, so then you'll get reinforcement B, C and D. Then you could escalate to 3, and then you get reinforcements E, F, G and H. So as soon as you escalate, you would place those reinforcements on their respective entry phases on the turn track. So the initial intervention always stays where it is, hence the 2 markers. Now what I had decided before starting the game was to start at full intervention, and which means you bring on all the way down to Z, A to Z, so you get all your reinforcements. It was just a bit more or less of an arbitrary choice, because when I look at it, in fact the Z reinforcements are not that powerful. It's just 4 1 strength point assets, but they could tip the balance in certain cases, the way the odds work out. But then I got a bit confused, and I thought, oh, okay, I could set it at 4 and then increase, and as I increase according to this table, so I would just add in incrementally, and then when I get to escalated to 6, I would get all of those. So then I thought, but then what's the point of ever starting at 1, because you can always escalate. And I didn't realise there was this separate table. So essentially what it means is that, say if you start at 1, you will only get that reinforcement, and you will get all the way up to T reinforcements if you escalate all the way up to 6, but you're not going to get anything after T, so U, V, W, X, Y, Z, etc. So if you set your initial intervention wherever you set it, if it's below 6, you're never going to get everything, even if you escalate all the way up to 6 later on in the game. So I backtracked. I said, well, I had intended to bring everything on, so I'll say I initially intervened at level 6. And I checked it out, the difference between the destabilization values and my actual die rolls, which I remembered were very low. I had 2 zeros, very fortunate, a couple of other low die rolls, which even, so instead of me being there or something like here, that's still well within the range of having 0 level added to destabilization. It's only going to happen on 6 or higher. So even at the top level that I would have been. So at 34, which is where I am, and I think I started at 30, that would have been 24, 25, 26. So I would have started at 26 there. So yeah, I would have needed an 8 or more on the D10 to get 1 point of escalation. Now I've gone up a bit because I've increased UN commitment to enable a bit more interdiction and so forth, and I increased the mobilization level to enable extra amphibious landings, which unfortunately, well, yeah, I was able to use. I can now have 2 a turn at the moment, and I think I used 2 on 1 turn, but they haven't been as useful as I'd like because of the North Korean heavy garrisoning, including this one and even this one earlier on, of the amphibious invasion hexes. But anyway, so now we're on 24 plus 10, yeah, so it's 34. So we're on this column here, and so normally on a 6 we would get 1 point of intervention. Now I've marked this here to remind me that it's now actually on 4. For die roll of 4 on the D10, starting at 0 going up to 9, we get intervention, and I've actually we get a global tension, sorry. And so global tension has actually gone up 2 points. Now the reason that we get the modifiers is, 1, because the North Korean player has declared Chinese invasion of Formosa, and then 2, because the UN player has declared national Chinese intervention. Now the UN national Chinese intervention happened prior, and that was these blue units. They're not very strong divisions. They're like 9 compared to 12 on the North Koreans, or 20 on the UN's full divisions. Full strength divisions. They're not hugely strong, but we desperately needed them at that point when North Korea was there. So the UN on turn 4, it must have been, I think maybe it was 5 when the North Koreans got there. I don't quite remember, but anyway, when it was, we called in those in the reinforcement segment of the second action phase to throw. No, I couldn't have done it because you have to throw them out. They if they spend the action phase there. Well, anyway, they were down close, so I knew we needed to call them in, and in fact we did. Yeah, so I had them available. One was here, and it did an amphibious invasion. No, it did an amphibious invasion here, and then moved up, and then the other 2, I think, were here, came in from here. So they were necessary, but because the UN did that, then the Chinese answered with Formosa invasion. So Formosa has now been invaded. The only effect of that is it adds 1 to that tension die roll. So the intention being, really, with that is that the North Koreans are asking for World War III to break out and end this conflict, in a sense, at least as it is given in the game. I mean, we could consider that they're escalating things, looking to the UN to back down their escalation. And then subsequently to that, so it was in turn 6, the North Koreans were, in fact, on turn 5 they called for Chinese intervention. They didn't get it. You have a little table, and first you can go for limited intervention. Once you've got that, you can try for full. You do it during the reinforcement phase of one of the action the reinforcement segment of one of the action phases, and you roll your die and you get some modifiers. These modifiers all depend essentially on the UN or Republic of Korean ROK forces, thank you sir, being north of the 38th parallel. Where is that? I've lost it here. And they're not yet at all. You can see this is all North Koreans still. So there were no modifiers. So not too hard to get limited intervention. They got it on the second try. So what that means is that there's yellow starred hexes at the top of the map here, and you can bring on the communist Chinese divisions. So where was I? Sorry. Okay, yes, so the Chinese come in on these hexes. There are some restricted hexes up here and here where they can only come in if only one per action phase, and then only if you have, I think if you have UN forces up here. So anyway, this will be the Chinese get they got 8 divisions. They would have got 12 if they haven't invaded Formosa, so it's quite a hit for them. But I think it's going to be fine, because you can see although the North Koreans and the Chinese, you can't break down their divisions into regiments, so they live and die as divisions. You can't kind of spread them out with a thin line. But they still got quite a few. You've got some weak ones here, but they still got regiments here, one full strength regiment here, another one there, and they got 2 down here. So that they in the last turn, the North Koreans essentially withdrew. So they withdrew from the road net here, and they withdrew some of their armour with assets, because they can't reassign the assets while the communist intervention is coming in. So you can see they're bringing back their valuable armour assets because they were losing them at a bit of a too fast rate. They only come in on a chance. There's no sort of guaranteed influx of armour assets, and they will be very helpful. You can see that the communist Chinese have none, so that the UN forces will be able to pack quite a punch against them. So so that's what happens. Turn 4, I'm pretty sure, was the high point. Didn't last a whole action cycle, sort of half a couple of weeks. Didn't last long enough for them to mine the harbour, of course. They were quickly pushed out. The next month, Chinese withdrew, and that withdrew more or less to here, like this, and then the last month they withdrew to here, withdrew their assets, and called in Chinese reinforcements. So the Chinese have organised limited intervention, and from now on the North Koreans will be calling for Chinese full intervention. That's more likely to happen as soon as UN units get across the 38th parallel. So how does the UN stand? Well, it's interesting because they've only got here and underneath here, there are 2 full divisions that are available. The rest are, you have air assets here. Now, these are just mnemonics, reminders for me, certain things. So this is the end of the intervention period. While we're in the Chinese intervention period, on the initiative table, the North Koreans roll here instead of generally down here with 1 or 2 initiative they've been spending each turn. You can see they get a lot, so they've been getting 2s and 3s. I think they even had 1-4 last turn when the Chinese came in, which means they can activate 4 units at once, and then the UN might have 1 or 2 in response. So that's going to last for 2 more turns. So they're going to be quite mobile. They won't be highly strong, but and the UN are going to be a bit more plodding, but they're going to they have to decide they've got a couple of things to decide. One is whether to keep a depot here. They're thinking of making a thrust down here. You can see North Koreans are a bit concerned about that. They've sort of got forces hovering here between the east and the western theatre. But to do that effectively, they need a depot there. But if you split your depots, they can't pull in supplies quite as well. If this was a 3, you're likely to get 2 supplies, maybe 3 a turn. If there's a 1 and a 2, you might get 2 here, not 3, and you might not even get 1 there. So it's a bit of a risk splitting your theatres like that. So I have to make that decision at the beginning of this game, turn 7. The other decision is, because we've only got 2 full regiments coming in, we can really only, against any garrisoned, and as they all are, amphibious invasion hexes, we can only make it with those regiments. So we've only got effectively 2 more amphibious invasions for the rest of the game. That's something I wasn't aware of, something I would have liked to have considered early, and so maybe keep a division back here available, because once they're on the map you cannot pull them back to Far East Command in preparation for amphibious invasion. Once they're on the map, they're on the map. So even though the UN, they have the reconstitution track, which effectively means all destroyed units will go here, then the next action cycle they go here, and the next action cycle they go here, and then the next action cycle they come back on the map. They come back at or around Busan. So they do not go back to Far Eastern Command for redeployment. They're being it is what it says. They're being reconstituted from destroyed units that straggling their way back to Busan, reconstituted, sent back out into the fray again. So Pyongyang's here. That's 4 victory points. The American is on 56 victory points, and they need how many is it? Basically they need, I can't remember, and I got my son patiently waiting me here, so I'm just going to wrap this up in a minute. But basically they need to take Seoul and Incheon and the city Yeongdong-po here, and they could take those and hold them for the rest of the game and all the rest of the cities they already have, and they will get a tactical victory. Now, so that would effectively bring us back to the start, that you might have North Koreans south of the 38th parallel. You probably want to push them back to the 38th parallel to give breathing space for Seoul there. That will win the Americans the game, but of course then the threat is that if they are just holding on sort of across here, the North Koreans could build up forces and launch a hefty attack. Now it wouldn't be as great as you might think, because an interesting thing about this is you can only stack 1 division in a hex. So, they cannot stack, they could mass lots of forces, but they will be spread out. And what that means, again, also any attacker has to attack all adjacent defenders, means that defence lines can be quite strong. So I think what I'm thinking is it would be quite easy to reach a stalemate wherever the front line is actually drawn, with the North Korean unable to punch through. They do have a far greater preponderance, especially now with Communist Chinese, far greater preponderance of divisions. So the UN they have the 3 weaker nationalist Chinese divisions. Then they have 1 here, 2, 3. That's regiment. 3, 4 divisions on the map, 2 more to come in, so that's only 6 divisions. They are stronger, but the North Koreans have, let's count their full strength ones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 14 against, how many did I say for the Americans? 6, was it? So but the Americans do have a lot more armor assets, more coming in, and they will have some more of these infantry assets, which will be able to tip the odds from 1-1 to a 2-1 if we're going UN division versus North Korean division. So it will be interesting. As a little, I was thinking of, okay, send up, sorry about darkness here, hang on, let me turn on the light. Sending up an amphibious invasion all the way up to here, which would garner 5 victory points here and then maybe 4 here, so 9. However, that would enable the Russians to start to come in, and they've got how many? Something like 3-4 divisions they could bring in. The nationalists, the communist Chinese would be bringing in divisions once per action phase here, so they could contest that, and the Americans would again be splitting their depots, and I think they could hold 1 or 2 of those, probably not one of those, probably not both, but they'd have to feed in assets from here and not get them onto here. So but the other thing, to do that you really need to raise the UN commitment level so that you're able to interdict up into these northern provinces, because at the moment, because of the UN commitment level sort of rule of engagement, they can only interdict below the 38th parallel. If they're going to start doing it further up, they'll have to go higher here. That will bring us up for greater chance of global tension, and basically that's a no-no. At the moment, if I roll a 4 or higher, which is 50% chance, seeing as we've got 0, 1, 2, 3. No, it's greater than 50% chance, so that's 60% chance a turn of engagement level going up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we might get World War III here. If we're lucky, it might be there. If we're really lucky, it's not going to happen. So what that was telling me was that with the intervention level that I decided at the start, the UN really had to gain all of these for their quick victory before we get to the end of the turn track. That's not going to happen. So I don't know, I'm slightly, I was going to say fairly confident, but I don't know, thinking about the maths, I'm not very good at figuring out odds without stopping and pausing and counting my fingers. I thought it was a bit better than that. I thought we could sort of pinch through without, but it's looking like it's going to be dicey. It's going to be dicey, so it will depend. The tactical victory, I think, is more or less assured. I don't think there's any way the North Koreans are going to hold that. They could try, if they try a forward defence, the UN might punch through them, and then it might collapse any further defence, and then you might get a flood of UN troops. So I think that, but then if that's the chance between stalemate or defeat, it might be worth it. But I'm thinking it's a fair chance that the UN will take this. They will gain a tactical victory. So it might just mean that the game comes down to the die roll on here, which will be decided by fate and the Chinese decisions, the North Korean decisions to invade Formosa, and the UN, and having forced the UN to bring in the nationalist Chinese early in garnering those 2 pluses to any die roll that we're making on that table. So we will see. It's all hanging in the balance, and the world waits as expectantly, worriedly.